Summary there from Lord Reid, the Lord President of the Supreme Court, and it did show a unanimous decision from all of the justices on the Supreme Court confirming what the UK government has been arguing throughout this process, that the Constitution is a reserved power of Westminster. That the devolved Parliament of Holyrood can legislate in the areas that have been devolved to it, but in the areas that are reserved for Westminster, it cannot demand, it cannot grab more power, and no area is that more pertinent than in the area of the Constitution, in what constitutes our country. There were also some fascinating tidbits in terms of where the scope of the decision could be decided, particularly whether this question could be asked at all. Lord Reid said that it could. There was a legitimate question to be asked there of the Supreme Court, but of course a decisive answer there in favour of the United Kingdom. Also a very fascinating tidbit in terms of one of the arguments of the SNP throughout this case, resting on a case that was heard in Quebec many years ago about whether or not self-determination, that principle of international law, would apply. That only applies to oppressed peoples and to colonies, and the Supreme Court there pretty clear that Scotland is not a colony. That might rile up some cybernat discourse, but it was pretty clear there. This is a civilised democratic nation, and the result there from the Supreme Court could not have been clearer.
Absolutely. I think we're going to go to Olivia Utley now for a reaction. Olivia is in Scotland. It's been a very divisive process, this, Olivia. We were all on the edge of our seats this morning to see what the result of this would be. What are your thoughts there from north of the border?
Well, absolutely. What a build-up that was. I mean, as Tom says, in some respects, it's a very decisive win for the UK government. On the other hand, what the UK government really wanted, of the three outcomes, i.e. a UK government win, a Scottish win and an indecisive result, was the third option, an indecisive result. Because if the Supreme Court had ruled that it couldn't rule either way on the matter because it was out of the scope of the Supreme Court, that would make it very, very difficult for the Scottish government to complain that there was some sort of constitutional roadblock to Scottish independence. As it is, with this decisive UK government victory, it could end up being a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, because you've then got Nicola Sturgeon saying the Supreme Court in London and the British government is stopping the Scottish people have a say over their own independence. The SNP has won election after election, and there is a clear mandate for independence. This is a constitutional roadblock to Scottish democracy. Her hope is that if she makes that argument, she'll get a wave of public support behind her from people who perhaps wouldn't have supported independence, but feel as though this is a decision which has been imposed on them by London. So, yes, it's a victory for the UK government, but I can see a bunch of Scottish nationalist supporters with their blue and white flags here, and actually this morning they don't look too unhappy. They think that this isn't the end of the road, and it's very hard to see how the UK government could now put this issue to bed. So it won't be all smiles in Westminster this morning.
Absolutely. And as we know, Nicola Sturgeon is not one to take no for an answer particularly easily. No doubt she will be hurriedly working out what their options are. I believe that we're going to hear from Suella Braverman this morning at some point. She's going to make a statement about this. She's going to give evidence to a Commons Home Affairs Committee this morning. We've also got PMQs, of course, at midday today. No doubt this will be raised there. But for now, at least, those who would like to see the United Kingdom remain united, they can take a sigh of relief at the moment, because obviously there are many more hurdles which have just been put in the way of Nicola Sturgeon if she is going to be able to put that referendum to the Scottish people. Olivia, thank you very much there from a very rainy Scotland. You are watching Bev Turner today on GB News. We're going to go straight to Rosie right now in the GB newsroom.
A very good morning. Coming up to 4 minutes past 10, you've just been hearing about that historic ruling. Time to get you up to date with the other stories making the headlines today. Homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers, have been staying in the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They highlighted the fact that they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are put up in a nearby hotel.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benson, says he'll support any protest against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
The Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride says a concerted effort's being made to ease the migrant crisis.
We have made a clear commitment that through time we will expect and will be seeing migration reducing. We've had an increase more recently because, of course, I think we've done the right thing with Ukrainian refugees. There have been almost 150,000 of those that have settled, Afghans and those from Hong Kong, and I think there are very few people that would criticise that.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden's blaming the government for failing to get a grip of the problem.
The hotel's not been taken over by migrants. What's happened is the Home Office has ended up booking hotels in places like Blackpool and around the country to put people up for extended periods of time because of their own failure to process applications, and it's costing a fortune. So it is the Home Office and their system failures.
Millions of pensioners will get a cash boost from today as part of the government's expanded fuel winter payment scheme. 11.6 million people will receive up to £600 to help with their energy bills. The government says the payments will be automatic. Households will get the money in their bank accounts over the next 2 months. In the US, multiple fatalities have been reported in the state of Virginia after an armed man opened fire at a Walmart. Local police say fewer than 10 people have been killed. Several others were injured during the shooting, which happened overnight in the city of Chesapeake. The gunman's also dead. It's not clear if that was from self-inflicted injuries. Leading medics are warning more GPs are leaving the profession than entering it. The Royal College of GPs says staff numbers won't be enough to meet current and future needs of the population. Health England, Education England says it's met the government's target for GP trainee recruitment for the 5th year running. Manchester United owners, the Glazer family, are thinking of selling the football club. It's just one of the options being considered by the owners, who say they're also seeking new investment. It follows the announcement that Cristiano Ronaldo has left the team with immediate effect after he publicly criticised the direction of the club. You're now up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Bev.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us on GB News. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner today, here now until 12. Supreme Court judge this morning have ruled that the Scottish Government has not got the power to hold another independence referendum without the permission of Westminster. We're going to have a look at what this means for Scotland and for the rest of the UK. Plus, this morning, homeless people in one of the UK's most deprived towns have told GB News that they've become invisible as authorities prioritise housing Channel migrants over their own citizens. We're going to have a look at the report in detail and discuss what can be done to support our homeless. And have you had problems getting eggs in your weekly shop? Well, some supermarkets are blaming avian flu for a shortage of them. And some are even rationing how many you can buy. I'm going to be speaking to one farmer who says that there is no shortage whatsoever. Find out what might really be going on. And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Please vote in our Twitter poll today. We're asking, do you want an independent Scotland? So far, 73% of you don't. Cast your vote now. We're running this, of course, because of this momentous announcement, this decision this morning by Lord Reid of the Supreme Court, saying that Scotland do not have the right to enact an independence referendum without the permission of the English Parliament down here in London. So let me know what you think about that. Also email me your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me on @gbnews. just tell me what you're thinking about anything else that we're discussing this morning. We've got a lot to get through. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, the Supreme Court, as we have just been hearing, has made this momentous decision this morning. They have ruled that the Scottish Government has not got the power to hold another independence referendum without the permission of the British Parliament down here. I'm joined now by MP Anthony Brown, who sits on the Treasury Committee. Good morning, Anthony. It's not exactly a shock decision. There were reports this morning that the Scottish Government thought they had about a 20% chance of getting the green light to enact this. What are your reactions at this early stage?
Well, I should say I don't normally comment on Scottish affairs, but I was waiting down the line to do an interview on the autumn statement. But as you say, it's not a surprise decision. I think the SNP really should acknowledge and recognise the results of the last referendum they had, which were very, very clear. The people of Scotland didn't want independence. You can't carry on having referendums until you get the result you want, the sort of never-endum, as it were. And they should focus on running Scotland in the interests of Scottish people. And it's heartbreaking seeing what's happened to the NHS in Scotland, which the SNP government is responsible for, and what's happening to education in Scotland, which used to have a wonderful school system, but standards have really run down now. So they should focus on doing what matters to the people of Scotland in their day-to-day lives.
Now, of course, Nicola Sturgeon would say, well, we're hamstrung by decisions that you're making down in Westminster. That's why our public services aren't doing so well. We need to cut ourselves free. We need to rejoin the EU so that we can run the Scotland that we want to run. Does she have any point at all?
Although Scotland is incredibly devolved, as you know, it's things like the health service is entirely under the control of the Scottish Government, and education is entirely under the control of the Scottish Government. And they do, in Parliament the whole time, that they spend their entire time trying to point the blame on the national UK Government for absolutely everything, most of which are their own decisions. And it's in Prime Minister's Questions Times today. I'm sure you'll get exactly the same tactics again, but actually they really need to take responsibility for all those things that they are politically responsible for and deliver better public services. And as I said, respect the results of the referendum that they already had.
There will, of course, be some Scottish people today who will be furious this morning at this judgment that they aren't being allowed this sovereignty that they're searching for. Do you think there should just be a period of time now in which Nicola Sturgeon goes away and just gets on, as you say, with running her own country? Is this also a distraction for the government down here in London when there is so much that needs dealing with at the moment on the desk of Rishi Sunak?
Well, I don't know how big a distraction it is for the national UK government. I mean, there are huge challenges facing the country. I'm a big supporter of the union, as is, I know, the Prime Minister. And as I said, there was a referendum in Scotland about Scottish independence. It was only 8 years ago, and the results were very, very clear. And you just can't, in any democracy, keep having referendums until you get the result you like. You have to, all political classes have to respect the results of those referendums, and then and deal with them and govern or oppose on the basis of the results of those referendums. It had a result.
OK. MP Anthony Brown, who sits on the Treasury Committee, thank you very much for your response and your reaction this morning. We really do appreciate it. Right, we are going to be taking a quick break, but after the break, I'm going to have my panel here. We're going to be discussing a GB News exclusive. This is a Home Office contractor who is looking for another 3 hotels in the Blackpool area to accommodate hundreds more Channel migrants. But what does that mean for our homeless? Also, in light of the Supreme Court ruling this morning, don't forget to vote in our Twitter poll. We are asking, do you want an independent Scotland? Cast your vote now. Send us an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and tell me what you think. You can also tweet us at GBNews. But now it's your weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A cold start out there for many of us, some fog patches as well, but further wet and windy weather is already making its way into the west. That will soon sweep across the rest of the UK during the rest of the morning and early afternoon. These weather fronts are moving quickly, tightly packed isobars pushing them through, and the rain, although short-lived, is intense. We've already seen that across Wales and the southwest, that rain clearing Northern Ireland, pushing through the rest of England and then arriving into Scotland as a fragmenting band, so the rain becoming more on and off, more showery as it moves into northern Scotland. Nevertheless, a damp afternoon to come with some flakes of snow over the higher tops. Now, there's going to be a strong wind ahead of that rain for the Northern Isles, again, gales for Shetland, but also a brisk wind from the southwest, sending a lot of showers in to the rest of the UK. Fewer showers, though, for eastern England, where there'll be some sunshine to end the afternoon. And then, as we go into the evening, mostly clear in the east of England, northern Scotland as well, away from the Northern Isles, but elsewhere across the UK. An awful lot of showers coming in from the west and from the southwest. I think the gusty wind overnight will keep a widespread frost at bay, but where we do get some clear spells towards the east and the far north, where we get some shelter from the wind, temperatures will approach 0. And it's a bright start for many on Thursday morning. Further showers for Wales, Northern England, as well as Scotland for a time. They then ease before the next batch of wet and windy weather sweeps in. This is another narrow weather front which will be fast moving, but an hour or two of fairly heavy rain is expected as it pushes eastwards. And it's a milder day actually tomorrow, 13 Celsius in the south, 11 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland. It's slowly warming up because the winds are coming from the southwest. However, after a fine day on Friday, those southwesterly winds will also bring some wet weather on Saturday, especially across western areas.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me here, Bev Turner, today on GB News. I'm going to introduce you to my panel now this morning to discuss all of the breaking news stories. I'm delighted to be joined by comedian and TV presenter Tommy Sandu is here, political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, who I am very happy to say has not done this before, so welcome, Sam.
Pleasure.
And journalist and broadcaster, you all know who he is. He's going to cause some trouble. Mike Parry is here, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we've just heard, everybody, that Nicola Sturgeon does not get her Scottish independence referendum without the permission of Westminster. Mike, reaction?
Well, I think she'll be very pleased, because I think it would have been a very difficult position for her to be in, to say, now I've got to load up and hold a referendum. She can now blame it on Westminster. But I'm also pleased that the Supreme Court have actually realised they're not the Supreme Court in this country. We've had a Supreme Court for 800 years, and it's called Parliament.
Yes.
So they've passed it back to them, and that's where it should have been.
Well, they're a relatively new institution, our British Supreme Court, aren't they?
Was founded in 2009 by Tony Blair, of course, and Tony Blair's government, and stacked it with judges who were going to feel a little bit like the way he felt about politics. And it's been like that ever since. Only last year, one of the road protesters went and appealed against a conviction for blocking the highway and got off in the Supreme Court because they judged, yes, Yes, I think you had a moral right to protest on the road.
Interesting. But Sam, what do you think, political editor? Was this? It was expected, really. This result, wasn't it?
It was expected, but I think this actually really does play into Nicola Sturgeon's hands. You can blame the English, you can blame Parliament. You know, it all plays well. Basically, she doesn't want to actually really have that referendum next October. She wants to be able to say, "I wanted to have the referendum, but I've been stopped by the people in power down in England." It's all their fault. That gives the party a reason to still exist. I mean, if it hasn't got this to campaign for, what does it exist for? Its domestic record is not that strong. So while you keep this on the table, you've still got a purpose to vote for the SNP. But, you know, when you look at their education record, obviously they've got the highest drug deaths in Europe. You know, there are a lot of domestic issues. Yeah. And so actually this is quite a good thing because it gives the SNP a purpose.
And it's infuriating, you know, to think how much taxpayers' money has been spent on this for her to conduct these sort of political shenanigans. Tommy, we don't want the country to be disunited, do we?
No, we don't. And exactly that. It's been going on for some time now. She keeps pushing the same agenda, and we're wondering, is this now even... Well, I actually thought today's decision might have been the time that she says, OK, maybe she's got to step down. Maybe she's pushing an agenda that nobody else wants, and this is it. This is the straw that breaks the back. But then in balance, I just want to say this, to say the other side of it, Scotland's a nation. People should have the right to choose their own future. And that feels a little bit immoral for me. I feel like, well, maybe that we should shift the power back, but then how long does this go on for? And like you say, we've got other things to worry about.
And actually, Westminster has been handing them so many reasons to want to conduct this referendum in the last year, and every time there's something messed up in Downing Street, Nicola Sturgeon would come out and go, well, you see, you're all an absolute shower of shame, and we want to break free. But anyway, we'll bring you Nicola Sturgeon's statement when she makes it, no doubt, I would have thought, at some point today. Now, on to another huge story. Homeless people in one of the UK's most deprived towns have told GB News that they feel that they've become invisible as authorities prioritise housing channel migrants over their own citizens. The group in Blackpool, a town I know and love, including young people and an armed forces veteran, say that they're being forced to sleep on the streets while more than 300 asylum seekers are staying in the comfort of one of the town's historic hotels. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been to take a look.
It's illumination season in Blackpool, but amidst the bright lights, there's a darker side to this tourist town. Down at street level, in the shadows, are Blackpool's forgotten. The homeless and the vulnerable are growing increasingly resentful, as one of the town's historic hotels plays host to more than 300 channel migrants, just yards from where they're forced to sleep rough on the streets.
I'm invisible. I am literally invisible. People walk past. They don't even see you now.
Sketch has been sleeping rough in Blackpool for months. His story sums up the absurdity of the channel migrant crisis and will serve only to stoke the anger felt by many. Inside this hotel, mainly young men who paid criminal gangs to cross the channel illegally. While life for Sketch and friend Gaz, an army veteran, seems almost unbearably miserable. With post-traumatic stress, his downward spiral eventually left Gaz on the streets. He didn't want to talk on camera, but Sketch sums up the anger they all feel and what they see as the injustice of their treatment, in stark contrast to the migrants nearby.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
With 50,000 hotel and bed and breakfast rooms across Blackpool, it's an obvious target for Home Office contractors looking for more asylum seeker accommodation. Indeed, the travel group linked to this hotel and 4 others in Blackpool confirmed to us they've been approached and offered a large sum of money by a company looking to acquire 3 hotels in the area for migrant use. They've said no at the moment, but the operations director admits the offer is tempting.
the industry itself is extremely difficult at the minute. So when something like that comes along, where you're guaranteed a year and and you're full all the time, and the rates that they're looking to pay for that, then yeah, I can see quite easily why it could be considered by somebody.
The area's Conservative MP says he'll be on the front line of any protests against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
Blackpool's Forgotten are desperate for help, but as authorities here are forced to house growing numbers of asylum seekers, Sketch and his companions are, it seems, way down the list of priorities.
It's hard. Last night, an elderly friend of ours fell ill, and we found the ambulance. He was close to death.
And as this resort heads into the winter months, life for those living rough on its streets will only get harder. Mark White, GB News, Blackpool.
Terribly sad. Let's talk to my panel about this now. Tommy, let me come to you first. Just your thoughts when you see that. It doesn't feel fair, does it?
No, it doesn't feel fair. It feels really grim as well. I mean, it feels like everything at the moment, doesn't it, Bev? Yeah. It just feels like everywhere you look, there's just no joy. And as we get...
And it's something like the irony, like a town like Blackpool is associated traditionally with fun.
Yeah.
Right? The lights are on at the moment. It's where you take the kids and you make yourself sick on the pleasure beach. And,
right. It's our Vegas. It's our glitz. It's our glam. It's where you're right. It's where memories are made.
Yeah.
Magical memories are made for children and people come with their families for holidays. But this is it. This is where we find ourselves. But what I want to say is I've done some work with homeless people before and gone and met several people that are living homeless. It's a complex situation because to compare, well, they are without a house, they are without a house. Therefore, we can compare these two situations, I think is somewhat naive. There's a lot more to why people are homeless. There's a lot of people why migrants are here. And some homeless people, not all, the ones that I spoke to a few years ago, were saying that they've kind of lost faith in society and life. They don't want to be integrated back into it. They're happy kind of being in their own space, not really attached to anything. They want to live that way, or at least they don't want to be a part of society. And for that reason, it's tricky to compare these situations. That's what I'm saying. I think we'd have to look beyond the fact that they're all just without beds.
They have complex needs.
Yeah.
A lot of the homeless people, as you say, will have complex needs. When I see stories like that, though, of our ex-forces, Sam Lister, I find that there's a terrible lack of justice in that we have just deserted these people who've been out and fought for our country. And it is. I know what you're saying, Tommy, in that we have to be careful with this. However, there is a very stark contrast when you only have a certain pot of money, isn't it, Sam? Who do you spend it on? Should we be prioritising the homeless?
Well, I think Tommy's right in that if you take out all of those people seeking asylum from those hotels, those rooms are not going to be filled by all those homeless people living on the streets in Blackpool for various reasons. It just would not be a kind of you take these people out and you put those people in. It just doesn't work like that. But I think there's lots of things in that report that really struck me. But the Armed Forces veteran, I think that really is a big issue. And we've known this for a long time. And actually, when people come out of the army, I think it's very difficult to adjust. They often find it difficult because they might have post-traumatic stress disorder, as we know from the veteran there. There's a report out today, actually, by Help for Heroes, obviously the charity that supports Armed Forces veterans. That says, actually, there's been a really big rise in mental health problems among veterans, actually partly fuelled by the coverage of the Ukraine, in the invasion of Ukraine. It's actually, that is contributing to this, but also through loneliness. And I think you've got these very complicated reasons, and the government is supposed to be helping veterans. It's got an armed forces covenant that is supposed to address these problems and stop people who come out of the army and struggle to adjust to civilian life, ending up on the streets. Or actually, we know that they can often end up in prison through various kind of spirals into descent. There's quite a high number in prison, and so I think that needs addressing.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Because, of course, it isn't a simple issue.
No, we're conflating two issues here. We're conflating the issue of illegal immigrants coming to this country and having to do something for them, and we're conflating it with the homeless situation in this country, which has always existed and which we've got to grab. Now, these two have merged. I think this is actually a very good idea Blackpool in the winter is grim, and I mean really grim, you know what I mean?
It is.
In the summer, it's beautiful. I was brought up in Chester. We used to go out on a Saturday night and never get home till Monday morning. We'd sleep on the beach, you know what I mean? Because
Not in the winter.
Not in the winter, I assure you. But the Golden Mile is wonderful in Blackpool, but one block behind the Golden Mile, you've got some of the poorest housing in this country. Now, this will bring money to Blackpool. Those hotels are all empty. Those 3 or 4... I've stayed in the Metropole.
Me? I too. I've stayed in the Metropole Hotel.
I covered the golf at Royal Lytham St Anne's next door and stayed in the Metropole, you know. And I can see the value of, getting the people coming across the Channel away from the south of England, because there is too much burden on the south of England having to cope with them. But this is the start of what I think should be a much broader idea, and that is that if we're going to spend this sort of money on housing people who've come to this country seeking asylum, I would literally give them grants to build their own new towns. Do you see what I mean? You know, give them a parcel of land, almost like how the Wild West was created in America, where people were given grants to fill up areas which weren't well populated and start building new communities. You can do that if you take them out of hotels and say, build something for yourself.
What, specifically for illegal immigrants?
Absolutely. I'd make it a scheme. I'd make it a scheme that when they land on the beach at Dover, they can accept the deal. Either we go to Rwanda, because we've got to get something sorted to stop them coming, or we introduce the Australian scheme and push them back or take them somewhere else. Or you say, if you want to stay, build your life in this country, we will give you a £5,000 grant and you will go to somewhere north of Milton Keynes and help to build a new town where you will live and create a community.
We'd literally have 1 million people a week arriving on dinghies, Mike, if you offered them a job and a village to live in. That can't be the solution.
I mean, everybody keeps saying we need more people in this country. You know, some people can't make their minds up whether we're going to have more immigrants in to boost the economy or not. But again, it would be limited numbers. That's what I'm saying.
Right, OK, I see what you mean. OK, but looking at these people here, just looking at this, if we can find about £7 million a day, I think it is, we're spending now to house illegal immigrants. If we can find that money, as you say, the hotels, the B&Bs in there are empty at this time of the year. Maybe we should say that B&B is for the homeless people. That's not going to cost us £7 million. No. That might cost us 100,000 for the year. What do you reckon, Tommy?
Yeah, I think there's a balance. I was trying to come into my spot. I don't think our land is that big that we can just say we'll take that area
It's not, Tommy. But when you get on a train and go out of London, to be honest, once you've got past London suburbs, you're just passing green fields everywhere.
And that's lovely. That's what we like about Great Britain, though. That's what we like
It is, but we all know at the towns we grew up in, the housing has spread out from what used to be the boroughs of the town into the fields, and we should do more of that. It's called growth, you know, and growth is good if it's productive.
I'm not sure that the residents of Preston or Warrington will be very happy having Immigrantville next door to their
but they
houses.
would if it improved the economy of their neighbourhood. We're always going on about levelling up. Well, levelling up means shoving money up to the north, you know. They try to send government departments up there. It's pathetic, Newcastle and all that kind of stuff. I'm saying if we're going to accept people, we do accept, don't we? Like 90% of all people who come to this country eventually.
I think it's about two-thirds,
About two-thirds or something like that. Give them something productive to do when they're here, because we're not even giving them work permits at the moment and crops are rotting in the field. So change the system, make it attractive for them to come and become part of our society and our community, and let's ally that to growth, because we know it can happen. It happened in America.
Well, I'm sure that our viewers will have a lot to say about that. Do let me know. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Are you in support of Mike Parry's idea? Now, after this quick break, we're going to be crossing over to Qatar to speak to our reporter. Paul Hawkins is going to bring you all you need to know about what's going on at the World Cup today. That is after the morning news with Rosie Wright.
Good morning, 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The UK government's won its legal fight to prevent a second referendum on Scottish independence.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
The Supreme Court ruling comes after Scotland's First Minister announced plans to hold a vote in October next year. Nicola Sturgeon says she's disappointed by the decision, but will respect it, adding a future without Westminster consent exposes a myth that the UK is a voluntary partnership and makes the case for independence. Homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, has been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are put up in a nearby hotel.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
Millions of pensioners will get a cash boost from today as part of the government's expanded winter fuel payment scheme. 11.6 million people will receive up to £600 to help with their energy bills. The government says most payments will be automatic. Households will get the money in their bank accounts over the next 2 months. Manchester United's owners, the Glazer family, are thinking of selling the football club. It's one of the options being considered by the American owners, who say they're also seeking new investments. It follows the announcement that Cristiano Ronaldo has left the team with immediate effect after he publicly criticised the direction of the club. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1914 and €1.1552. The price of gold is £1,458.92 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,496 points.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Very good morning to you. You are watching Bev Turner Today on GB News. It is 10:07. We've been asking about Scottish independence. We've got a Twitter poll running at the moment to say, do you want to see an independent Scotland? This is after this historic ruling this morning from Lord Reid at the Supreme Court, saying that Nicola Sturgeon does have to seek permission from Westminster before she can enact a referendum. You have been getting in touch about this. Derek has said, Scottish independence? No, we all live on the same island. It's a matter of national security. Michael said they should not get independence. They will never be able to survive on their own financially. Diane in Warrington says, we do not want an independent Scotland. And Moira said Sturgeon should resign. She has ruined our country. And 75% of you so far on our Twitter poll saying that you agree with the decision this morning. Not only that, you do not want our glorious union to be divided, and I have to say I think that I agree. Now, moving on, we are now going, I'm delighted to say, over to Qatar, to the World Cup. I just love these items, not least because the pictures are just so glorious out there in the sunshine. Qatar served at one of the biggest shocks in football history yesterday as Saudi Arabia beat Argentina 2-1. Meanwhile, Spain, Germany and Belgium are all hoping to make a better start when they play later today. So, Paul Hawkins, you are there in Doha. There he is, in the sunshine. Absolutely gorgeous pictures. Is the atmosphere still as good as it was yesterday, Paul?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it cranked up a notch yesterday when Saudi Arabia beat Argentina. The reverberations of that still being felt here. Saudi fans really happy. In fact, a lot of Arab fans really, because it was a big victory, not just for Saudi Arabia, but for the Arab world. In fact, right now, Morocco taking on Croatia. That one's currently goalless. Later today, Germany play Japan in their first ever competitive World Cup clash between the two sides. Then Spain take on Costa Rica. So this evening, how can we forget this evening, Belgium against Canada. Belgium, one of the best sides in the world, taking on Canada, who have yet to score a World Cup goal. They haven't featured at the World Cup since 1986. But hey, look, looking at yesterday when Saudi Arabia beat Argentina, shocks are possible.
I know you're not necessarily a sports presenter, Paul, so I'm sorry if this is a bit mean, but if you can just channel your inner Gary Lineker for a moment, because I am quite interested to know what happened in that Saudi Arabia match to make them beat one of the best South American teams in the world.
So I don't want to get too tactical, but essentially the Saudi Arabian team played quite high up the pitch. The defence was pressed quite high, which is a high-risk strategy, and that's why the Argentinians got the first goal through a penalty. That's why they had 2 goals disallowed. They were right. The Saudis were riding their luck, and even when it got to half-time, you thought, OK, this high-risk strategy may not pay off for the Saudis, but they kept pressing high up into the Argentine area, and they scored 2 really decent goals. And then they had to backtrack because the Argentines threw the kitchen sink at them, and they even cleared a goal off the line. So it was tactically very astute by the Saudi coach, who's taken the likes of Ivory Coast to champions in the Africa Cup of Nations. He does have a pedigree in taking unfancied teams really far in competitions and even winning silverware. Saudis have brought him in, and he did a really good job yesterday. I hope that's kind of explained it as simply as possible.
That, Paul Hawkins, was absolutely brilliant. And for a football idiot like me, I now totally understand. And when I watch Saudi Arabia, I will have in mind what you've just said. So that was just beautifully done. What about England? We're going to be hearing from Gareth Southgate later today, aren't we? Hasn't Harry Kane got a problem with his ankle?
He's having a scan on it. He took a pretty serious knock in it during that game against Iran. He kind of carried on for a little bit, but eventually came off for Callum Wilson. So they've had a scan on it. We should hear something about the England press conference, which is due to take place around mid-afternoon today. We've got the Wales press conference ongoing. We'll bring you any lines that come out of that. But we should hear from the England camp later today on the status of Harry Kane's ankle. And of course, we hope that it comes through. But even if it doesn't, and he has to be rested for 1 game, England should still have enough in the locker to beat the USA on Friday, and it would definitely be worth. They don't want to risk him, and then he's out for the rest of the tournament or misses more games. Better to rest him if they do have to, so that he's then better for the big England-Wales clash next week.
Now, we've got this other massive football story going on here at the moment. This news that the Glazers might sell Man United. This, of course, off the back of the interview that Cristiano Ronaldo did, in which he really laid into his what is now his former employer in Man United. Do you think Portugal will be preoccupied by what's going on with Ronaldo? When are they playing? They're playing tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, they're starting against Ghana tomorrow. That should be a good game, actually. But Cristiano Ronaldo has already said, look, he's not going to be sidetracked. The Portugal team are still very much focused on the World Cup, and what's going on with Manchester United and in his club life isn't affecting the team, and it shouldn't do, really. So we'll see how he plays tomorrow. We'll only find out whether that's actually true when they turn out on the pitch, and Ghana are a decent side, so don't write them off at all. But yeah, there was only one way that this was going to end. When you go and give an interview you and you say basically you don't respect your boss, there's only one way that that's going to end, isn't it? And so they're both parting, and it's probably for the best for both sides, given United have been doing pretty well without him, to be honest, and he wants to go and play elsewhere. So there's also bubbling in the background, the Glazers, who own Manchester United, saying that they're interested and they're looking at options to sell the club. That's going to be heaven to the ears of a lot of United fans who've wanted them out for a while. The Glazers probably looking at it, they're interested in football, but they've always seen it as an investment. Given the ground, Old Trafford, and the training ground where they train needs significant investment, and also given that the European Super League, this kind of pumped up Champions League on steroids, isn't going to happen anytime soon. So the extra money from that isn't forthcoming, and the club have been saddled with £600 million worth of debt by the Glazers. They're probably looking at it and thinking maybe it's time to sell up.
OK. All right. Thank you, Paul. Paul Hawkins there in Qatar, bringing us all of the news from there. Not only the culture and the socialising and all the fans, but also a bit of match analysis, which was fantastic. Let me go to a couple of your messages here. We were talking about Mark White's package that he went up to Blackpool. He recorded for us. This was looking at how many illegal immigrants are being housed in Blackpool, whilst also interviewing some of the British homeless people who were sat on the streets feeling like they were invisible. Linda in Leeds says, Britain is now the dumping ground for illegal immigrants. We are the laughingstock of Europe. We cannot control our borders. Dave in Wirral has said, not all people sleeping on the streets want accommodation. This is what Tommy mentioned on our panel. Many live like this as a life choice. Many beg for money for drugs. Numerous charities and outreach workers continue to offer support to these people. They'll spend a night in a shelter, get dry and get a meal. They will leave and move back onto the streets. Keep them coming. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, a story that I have wanted to do since I saw this gentleman go viral, actually, on social media, because this is about something that many of us know and love, and we have almost daily: eggs. You might not be able to get any at the moment, as there are reports of an egg shortage. Tesco has become the latest supermarket to ration the number of eggs that customers can buy due to supply issues, now limited to only 3 boxes per person. The move comes as farmers face rising costs and are also being hit by an outbreak of bird flu. But is this strictly true? Because it's certainly how it's being reported in the press. Well, this Welsh farmer didn't think so.
Supermarkets, instead of upping the price for you and leaving our price the same, if they up the price for you, which they already have done, and gave us some of that price, then we wouldn't be making a loss producing eggs and the shelves would still be full.
Well, the man in that video is joining me now, Johan Humphreys. Thank you so much for talking to me this morning. I've been trying to get hold of you since I saw your very impassioned plea on Instagram. What is going on, Johan?
It's a bit of a sticky situation at the minute. So it's costing us quite a bit of money to produce these eggs that you can see behind me. It can cost an egg producer anywhere from £1.20 to £1.40 to produce a dozen eggs. We're currently getting paid around £1.09 for that dozen eggs. So the cost of production is a lot higher than the amount we get paid for them.
So why have your costs gone up so much to produce the eggs?
So, feed costs have gone really high. So I've gone from paying £250 a tonne to £400 a tonne for feed. And I go through 30 tonne a week. My electricity bill has tripled, at least tripled, the cost of buying new birds has gone up £1 a bird. And I have 32,000 birds, so that's 32,000 straight off the bat.
OK, so the supermarkets, in your opinion, the supermarkets are not respecting your hugely increased costs. And so are you just at an impasse with them, that you're not passing on the eggs to the supermarkets? They don't have them to sell to us. Is that what's happening?
Not so much, no. It's producers... The cost of producing eggs went up so high that producers just couldn't physically continue producing the eggs. So when their shed was emptied, they haven't refilled.
Right.
So there's 8 million less laying birds being ordered for next year. So that's about 8 million less eggs every single day.
Wow. So this is only the start of this phenomenon right now. Are the farmers communicating with the supermarkets about this and trying to come to some sort of resolution?
Yes, so we're all part of the British Free Range Egg Producers Association, and they're the voice of us farmers, egg producers, with the supermarkets, because, you know, I'm just an angry little farmer in Wales. I'm a very small fish in a very big pond. That's why I took to social media to try and, you know, bad press is worse than anything, isn't it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
And were you surprised by the reaction that you've had, Joanne?
Yeah, completely blown away. You know, all I can do is thank the general public for supporting us farmers. You know, us as farmers, we want to produce food. That's our jobs. So we want to be producing this great British product. You know, these are Welsh free-range eggs. They're lovely. It's not that we don't want to produce them. We just simply can't afford to produce them.
Now, I saw when you did take to social media, I was one of the people in the comments section saying good for you for raising awareness of this and shining a light on it. You had a lot of people, Joanne, contacting you to say, can we buy the eggs directly off you, didn't you? Can we cut out the middleman? What's the position on that for you?
So I produce just under 12 million eggs every year. So it's a lot of eggs to shift. That's, you know, that's a lot of eggs to try and move. But I am in the process of setting up a website where you can buy directly off me. You know, you can buy a tray of 30 or box of 12 or setting up something like that, yeah.
So let me just tell you what the Secretary of State for DEFRA has said. So Therese Coffey has said that some contracts and some supply chains may be disturbed, but we hope it's a temporary issue. What would your response to that be?
So, you know, it's going to take 5 months to get 8 million hens back laying. So the 8 million hens that haven't been ordered for next year's flocks, if they got ordered today, it would take 5 months at least before their eggs got on the shelves.
So all of these headlines about avian flu, how much truth is there in those, Joanne?
So avian flu is a factor, you know, it's out there. But only 2.5 million laying birds have been culled due to avian flu. So considering 8 million birds haven't been ordered, the 2.5 million that have been culled isn't making much. There was bird flu last year, wasn't there?
Yeah.
You know, over 1 million birds got culled last year because of bird flu and we didn't have an egg shortage.
Well, listen, it's so nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for telling your story to GB News. No doubt you'll get a few more followers on social media, and we wish you all the very best with it. Please keep working hard. We need our farmers to be doing the amazing job that you're all doing in these really uncertain times in terms of our food supply. So thank you so much. Joanne Humphreys there. Find him on social media if you want to send him a message of good luck and maybe buy some eggs off him. Right, moving on. King Charles welcomes President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa to London today for his first state visit as monarch. It's a busy 3-day schedule for the leader, including visits to Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, Parliament and Downing Street. So joining me now is our GB News reporter, Catherine Forster at Downing Street. Good morning, Catherine. So this is the first state visit since King Charles took to his throne recently. How has it gone so far? What has the reaction been like?
Well, very well so far. Of course, when he arrived yesterday, we had all the pomp, all the pageantry. He was treated to the traditional state banquet at Buckingham Palace. He also made a speech. He addressed MPs and peers in the Royal Gallery in the Palace of Westminster. Now, today, he will be coming to number 10 Downing Street to have lunch with the Prime Minister. We're told this will be around 1:30. Obviously, the Prime Minister has got Prime Minister's questions first, and they will be keen to build good relationships. Rishi Sunak has previously said both countries want to turbocharge infrastructure investment and economic growth together. They'll be talking about the energy crisis, they will be talking about climate, they'll be talking about Ukraine, but more than anything, they will be focusing on trade and investment. Of course, South Africa is an important country to Britain. As a member of the Commonwealth, I think it's our biggest trading partner in Africa. And of course, after the Brexit vote, we are looking to form new trade deals, new alliances. Of course, this is not a new alliance, but to build relationships all around the world. A couple of sticking points. South Africa has never actually publicly condemned Russia for invading Ukraine, which is, of course, rather problematic. That stems probably from the fact that the Soviet Union bankrolled the anti-apartheid movement and the ANC going back. So there is a residual loyalty to Russia there. But certainly Rishi Sunak will be hoping that this will be a productive visit. And of course, it's the first state visit since before COVID, so that's over 3 years. And these state visits are requested by the government. This was already in the schedule before the late Queen Elizabeth passed away.
OK, thank you, Catherine. What do we think Rishi Sunak will say today in PMQs about this historic decision that Nicola Sturgeon cannot hold her independent referendum without his permission?
Well, I imagine he'll be saying quite right too. The government in Westminster have always been very firm that any decision on a Scottish referendum is a decision to be made in Westminster. It's not something that can be farmed out to Holyrood. So I think the government will be very pleased about this. Of course, Nicola Sturgeon will now go down the this is terrible, Westminster shouldn't be controlling the fate of the people of Scotland route. But I think a relief for the government today on that score, at least.
Very much, Catherine Forster. They're down at 10 Downing Street, and of course we will be bringing you PMQs at midday here on GB News. Quickly, some more of your views. Lots of you getting in touch and reacting to Mike Parry's views. Pauline has said, always been a great fan of Mike. I can't believe I've just heard him say, give them money to create ghettos. This was off the back of whether we should be housing illegal immigrants in hotels. Mike's suggestion was you give them a trowel and you make them build their own village. Alan has said his idea of migrant towns would create segregation of people, not integration. Most stupid idea I've heard to date. It would increase illegal immigration tenfold. And Ian says, your man, that's Mike Parry, suggesting building new towns for immigrants is a fruitcake, as if we don't have enough ghettos. He wants to create more. Mike Parry has a very thick skin. I'm sure he can take those reactions. We're going to hear also what Mike and Sam Lister and Tommy Sendu have to say in our next hour. But we have come to the end of our first hour. I'm going to be right back with more after this short break.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A cold start out there for many of us, some fog patches as well, but further wet and windy weather is already making its way into the west. That will soon sweep across the rest of the UK during the rest of the morning and early afternoon. These weather fronts are moving quickly, tightly packed isobars pushing them through, and the rain, although short-lived, is intense. We've already seen that across Wales and the southwest, that rain clearing Northern Ireland, pushing through the rest of England and then arriving into Scotland as a fragmenting band, so the rain becoming more on and off, more showery as it moves into northern Scotland. Nevertheless, a damp afternoon to come with some flakes of snow over the higher tops. Now, there's going to be a strong wind ahead of that rain for the Northern Isles, again, gales for Shetland, but also a brisk wind from the southwest, sending a lot of showers in to the rest of the UK. Fewer showers, though, for eastern England, where there'll be some sunshine to end the afternoon. And then, as we go into the evening, mostly clear in the east of England, northern Scotland as well, away from the Northern Isles, but elsewhere across the UK, an awful lot of showers coming in from the west and from the southwest. I think the gusty wind overnight will keep a widespread frost at bay, but where we do get some clear spells towards the east and the far north, where we get some shelter from the wind, temperatures will approach zero. And it's a bright start for many on Thursday morning. Further showers for Wales, Northern England, as well as Scotland for a time. They then ease before the next batch of wet and windy weather sweeps in. This is another narrow weather front which will be fast moving, but an hour or two of fairly heavy rain is expected as it pushes eastwards. And it's a milder day actually tomorrow, 13 Celsius in the south, 11 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland. It's slowly warming up because the winds are coming from the southwest. However, after a fine day on Friday, Those southwesterly winds will also bring some wet weather on Saturday, especially across western areas.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner. Today on GB News, we've got lots to get through before midday. An hour ago, the Supreme Court Judge, Lord Reid, ruled that the Scottish Government has not got the power to hold another independence referendum. We'll be hearing from First Minister Nicola Sturgeon in half an hour. MP Miriam Cates is going to be here in the studio with me to discuss the online safety bill and whether it's time to introduce age verification to keep children safe online. And as always, I'll be joined by my fantastic panel talking about the day's top stories. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
A very good morning to you. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The UK government's won its legal battle against a second Scottish independence referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
The Supreme Court ruling comes after Scotland's First Minister announced plans to hold a vote in October of next year. Nicola Sturgeon said she's disappointed by the decision but will respect it. She also said, though, that it exposes as myth any notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership and makes the case for independence. Homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300 mostly male asylum seekers have been staying in the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets, while Channel migrants are put up in a nearby hotel.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benson, says he'll support any protest against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is blaming the growing migrant crisis on extenuating circumstances. She's being questioned about the government's asylum policy by the Home Affairs Committee.
We've never seen 40,000 people arrive in the UK through dangerous and illegal means. We've never had 140,000 people welcomed in good faith, and rightly so, from Ukraine, who are, to some degree, taking up some of our accommodation. We've never seen, in addition to that, another 80,000 people who we are accommodating who are waiting for their asylum claims. That all takes up beds and accommodation.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says the government's simply failing to get a grip on the problem.
The hotel's not been taken over by migrants. What's happened is the Home Office has ended up booking hotels in places like Blackpool and around the country to put people up for extended periods of time because of their own failure to process applications, and it's costing a fortune. So it is the Home Office and their system failures.
Millions of pensioners will get a cash boost from today as part of the government's expanded winter fuel payment scheme. 11.6 million people will receive up to £600 to help with their energy bills. The government says most payments will be automatic, with households getting their money in their bank accounts over the next 2 months. In the US now, multiple fatalities have been reported in the state of Virginia after an armed man opened fire at a Walmart. Local police say fewer than 10 people were killed. Several others were injured during the shooting. The gunman's also dead. It's not clear if that was from self-inflicted injuries. Leading medics are warning more GPs are leaving the profession than are entering it. The Royal College of GPs says staff numbers won't be enough to meet the current and future needs of the population. Health Education England says it's met the government's target for GP trainee recruitment for the 5th year running. Manchester United's owners, the Glazer family, are thinking of selling the football club. It's just one of the options being considered by the American owners, who say they're seeking new investment. It follows the announcement that Cristiano Ronaldo has left the team with immediate effect after he publicly criticised the direction of the club. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News, TV, radio and online. Now, an hour ago, the Supreme Court Judge Lord Reid ruled that the Scottish Government has not got the power to hold another independence referendum without Westminster permission. So what is next for SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon? No doubt she will use this as a stick to beat Rishi Sunak's Westminster Government. We're going to be hearing from her in about half an hour. I'll be joined by the wonderful Conservative MP Miriam Cates later in the studio after she brought up the issues of the harms of online pornography to children. Is now the time that we have age verification online? Let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. And again, I'm going to be joined back in the studio by my fantastic commentators. They're going to be here in about 20 minutes for analysis and debate of the day's biggest stories, including the dreaded Christmas and New Year rail strikes that we've got coming up. And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. We've got a poll up asking, do you want an independent Scotland? 75% of you so far say no, we do not. You want to keep the union united. Make sure you log on to Twitter and cast your vote. Please do email me as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to give me your opinion on anything and everything that we're discussing. So, as you may have already heard this morning, the Supreme Court Judge Lord Reid has ruled that the Scottish Government has not got the power to hold another independence referendum at the moment. We're going to be hearing from First Minister Nicola Sturgeon very shortly, but first let's get some reaction. Joining me now is Austin Sheridan, former SNP Glasgow City Councillor, and Brian Monteith, former Scottish Member of Parliament. Thank you both very much for joining me. We had the conversation yesterday, the three of us, before this announcement. Of course, now we have the result. Austin, your reaction, please.
Well, I'm disappointed in the result in itself, but I think the first thing we should make clear is that it's not the Lord Justices on the court, that are to blame for the judgment. All they're doing is interpreting the law, and we should fundamentally respect their position on that. Secondly, one of the good things that I can take from it is it takes away the myth that the UK is a voluntary union. It would appear that the people of Scotland, despite consistently voting against a Conservative government, now it would appear that they're trying to block our opportunity to leave it, which would suggest to me that now Scotland is in a position where it's being governed without consent, which is very concerning.
OK, Brian, over to you. Scotland is being governed without consent. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's absolutely laughable, if not actually dangerous. What Austin and other nationalists like him want to suggest is somehow that this is about the Tories. Well, let me remind Austin and all the other nationalists listening in that, in fact, when there was an election for the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, which I was a former member of, the vote was 50.4% for the Unionist parties, them being the Tories, Labour and Liberal Democrats, and only 49% for the SNP and Greens. So, in fact, the democracy, the statement, the belief of the Scottish people was that they would prefer government by one or a merger of those three parties. Certainly on the issue of the referendum, there was no support, because even Nicola Sturgeon herself said those against a referendum, those against independence, could still vote SNP. There is no question about democracy or a mandate. What is shown here by the decision, unanimous decision of the court, is that even a consultative referendum cannot be delivered by the Scottish Parliament without the agreement of the Westminster government.
Austin, in some way, is this what Nicola Sturgeon will want now? Because she doesn't have to convince the Scottish people to vote in the referendum. She can just use this as a stick to beat Rishi Sunak with, to demonstrate that the Scottish people are not represented by Westminster.
I just have to correct Mr Munty from one point. If you look at the regional list vote in 2021, pro-independence parties got over 50% of the vote. So I'm not entirely sure where he's getting those figures from, but I thought I would correct the record. No, this is not what Nicola Sturgeon would have wanted. We would have wanted to have had a referendum in the timetable that we set out. Unfortunately, that is not an option, but it is not the only option that we have for the people of Scotland to have their say. Nicola Sturgeon will be setting that out in her statement at 11:30. But what this will do is it will create a sense of urgency. It will ignite the independence movement. We're going to see demonstrations in every single major city in Scotland at 5:30 tonight. And the people of Scotland and their voice will not be ignored. The people of Scotland democratically elected a Scottish Parliament that's pro-independence. The majority of Scottish MPs at Westminster support independence. The majority of Scottish people reject the Tories and reject their government. And now what the Supreme Court have done is they've said that we can't leave a government that Scotland hasn't voted for without their permission. So Scotland is now being governed without consent. It is extremely concerning. It's an affront to democracy. And the people of Scotland will take to the streets to defend their civil liberties and their right to a democratic path to independence.
Brian Monteith, it looks like you want to come in. Apparently you got your figures wrong there.
Well, I don't think I got my figures wrong, because I was, of course, talking about the constituency vote, the vote where all parties are able to stand, but some parties, such as the Greens, chose not to stand candidates in most of the seats. So that gives you a clear indication. And of course, Austin doesn't actually challenge the fact that he frames it as being about the Tories. Well, in fact, there's evidence now that in Scotland that Labour are the main opposition party through polling. So he can hardly frame it about being the Tories. But that's how they like to present it. It's about getting the Tories out. Well, let's just make this clear. If there's a general election tomorrow and Sir Keir Starmer was returned as Prime Minister, which would be highly likely, the SNP balloon is burst, because it's no longer about the Tories. It's the fact that a Labour government would be in and would be doing the same thing, delivering the same policy. So I don't think you can frame this about being a democratic deficit or somehow Scots are not being listened to. They were listened to in 2014. They expected that would last. And it's people like Austin who are actually rejecting the democratic will of the Scottish people.
Austin,
I'll tell you what, I will concede to Brian T from one point. It is not just about the Tories, it is fundamentally about Westminster rule. Say, if the majority of the Scottish people return SNP MPs and we have a Labour government, then Labour would still be governing Scotland without consent of the Scottish people. Now that we no longer have a democratic route, it would appear to independence through referendum. It is extremely concerning. The other thing as well about Mr Monteith is that, you know, democracy didn't stop in 2014, right? We had a referendum in 2014. People are allowed to change their mind. People are allowed to vote for another say if they want to. The people have voted for that say. Instead of trying to block an independence referendum, I think it's very, very telling that Tories, Labour and the Lib Dems seem very unwilling to bring forward their positive case for a union in a referendum campaign. I think that the cat's out of the bag, and the reason they don't want to do that is because they know there isn't a positive campaign for union in Scotland anymore. And at the end of the day, it might be a minor setback for the SNP and independence movement, but it's certainly not going to stop us.
Brian, you can't. Brian, you kind of can't blame people like Austin, given how shambolic events of Westminster have been in the last 6 months to a year, with the number of prime ministers that we've had, and the fact that it looks like nobody has been holding the reins tightly. However, is it just time for them to accept they lost?
Well, I'm not here to hold a torch for the Conservatives. I'm one of their most ardent critics. Certainly in the columns I write for the Scotsman. But what's happened here is that Nicola Sturgeon appealed for a mandate in the Holyrood elections. And had she won that, I think there would have been a strong moral pressure on the UK government to concede agreement on the Section 30 order. But she didn't gain it. So she then went to the Supreme Court because her own Lord Advocate would not even approve the bill as having authority. And the result is that the Lord Advocate was right, that in fact it doesn't have the authority. The Supreme Court has made the judgment. But this suits Nicola Sturgeon because it means that she can nurse this grievance and try and appeal to her core vote to keep her in power. That's all it's about. It gets her out of jail of not delivering the referendum she promised, unjustly promised, because she had no authority to do so. But now she can blame the Supreme Court and a democratic deficit. Well, it doesn't hold water. She was rejected in the sense of asking for that moral authority by the Scottish people.
OK, gentlemen, thank you so much for another lively debate. You're both brilliant at articulating both sides of this story. I'm sure our listeners and our viewers are fascinated, actually, hearing the implications. Thank you so much, Brian Monteith and Austin Sheridan there. It's fascinating, isn't it, on a day like today, because it's all about the rule of law. It's all about the minutiae of the legislation and the jurisdictions which would be afforded. And yet, it's incredibly emotional. It's a very emotional issue for whichever side of the divide you're on. At the moment, 75% of you watching GB News want us to stay united with Scotland. And, of course, you will be delighted this morning to know that Nicola Sturgeon does have many more hoops to jump through if she wants to offer another referendum. Now, moving on, homeless people in one of the UK's most deprived towns have told GB News that they've become invisible as authorities prioritise housing channel migrants over their own citizens. The group in Blackpool, including young people and an armed forces veteran, say that they're being forced to sleep on the streets while more than 300 asylum seekers are staying in the comfort of one of the town's historic hotels. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has the report.
It's illumination season in Blackpool, but amidst the bright lights, there's a darker side to this tourist town. Down at street level, in the shadows, are Blackpool's forgotten. The homeless and the vulnerable are growing increasingly resentful, as one of the town's historic hotels plays host to more than 300 channel migrants, just yards from where they're forced to sleep rough on the streets.
I'm invisible. I am literally invisible. People walk past. They don't even see you now.
Sketch has been sleeping rough in Blackpool for months. His story sums up the absurdity of the Channel migrant crisis and will serve only to stoke the anger felt by many. Inside this hotel, mainly young men who paid criminal gangs to cross the Channel illegally. While life for Sketch and friend Gaz, an army veteran, seems almost unbearably miserable. With post-traumatic stress, his downward spiral eventually left Gaz on the streets. He didn't want to talk on camera, but Sketch sums up the anger they all feel and what they see as the injustice of their treatment, in stark contrast to the migrants nearby.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
With 50,000 hotel and bed and breakfast rooms across Blackpool, it's an obvious target for Home Office contractors looking for more asylum seeker accommodation. Indeed, the travel group linked to this hotel and 4 others in Blackpool confirmed to us they've been approached and offered a large sum of money by a company looking to acquire 3 hotels in the area for migrant use. They've said no at the moment, but the operations director admits the offer is tempting.
The industry itself is extremely difficult at the minute, so when something like that comes along where you're guaranteed a year and and you're full all the time and the rates that they're looking to pay for that, then yeah, I can see quite easily why it could be considered by somebody.
The area's Conservative MP says he'll be on the front line of any protests against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
Blackpool's Forgotten are desperate for help, but as authorities here are forced to house growing numbers of asylum seekers, Sketch and his companions are, it seems, weighed down the list of priorities.
It's hard. Last night, an elderly friend of ours fell ill and we found the ambulance. He was close to death.
And as this resort heads into the winter months, life for those living rough on its streets will only get harder. Mark White, GB News, Blackpool.
Mark White there in Blackpool. Now, there is still plenty to come after this quick break. My panel will be talking us through some big stories, including a huge rise in online gambling, New Year travel strikes, and a coroner ruling on the death of a 14-year-old Irish boy from the COVID vaccine. Send us an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. We've got a poll up there at the moment, a Twitter poll, asking, do you want an independent Scotland? It's stayed pretty consistent all morning, this. Roughly 76% of you so far do not want an independent Scotland. Time for the weather now.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards in public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30am every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Very good morning. It's 11:24. You are listening to and watching Bev Turner today on GB News. I will reintroduce you to my panel this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by comedian and TV presenter Tommy Sandu. Hi,
Hello.
Tommy.
Hello.
A political editor of Daily Express, Sam Lister, who's doing a panel for the very first time, and I'm honoured that she's chosen me to do it. And journalist and broadcaster, a face you know well, Mike Parry, who is currently getting an absolute kicking from most of you for suggesting that illegal immigrants
He loves it.
build their own towns somewhere
Right.
near Blackpool. Right, Mike, let's move on. This is a really sad story. Death of a boy, 14, 3 weeks after COVID jab.
Yes. Now, the position on COVID, of course, is incredibly split in this country. I am a big supporter of the COVID jab. I've had all four now, but I have got an underlying heart condition, so I was put right up at the top of the list and told, get there quick, OK? Amazing thing happened to me, because I was desperate to get the jab because of the dicky heart I've got. But when I had the first one, I felt immediately immensely better. And I've talked to doctors about it since, and they said that could have been psychosomatic. That could have been the fact that you were living in fear because you were very vulnerable. And had you got COVID, you really would have been in trouble with my heart, right? The minute you got it, I'm not joking, I felt like I was floating on air. I had a drink for the first time in 3 months, an hour after I had my jab, to celebrate because I felt so good.
That, Mike, 'cause I think you and I were slugging it out quite a lot on these panel debates at the time, weren't we? And I remember saying to you, what are you frightened of, Mike?
Yes.
And now you're admitting you were frightened of dropping dead from COVID.
Well, I was. I was, because, you know, when you've got a tricky heart, if you get any kind of virus, you can be hit 10 times harder than somebody else. It just, you know, it's electricity spark in your heart and all that kind of stuff. So I immediately felt better, and the doctors said, sorry to interrupt there, but no, it couldn't have affected you physically that quickly. It's something that, you know...
But you know what? The impact mentally on us during that pandemic was immense. Even though I was a massive advocate for saying every injection should be given on a cost-benefit analysis based on your individual profile, which was what we always did with medicine. It went out the window. When I got COVID... I felt terrible. I was really poorly, poorly. And then a friend of mine said to me, don't think you've got COVID, just think you've got the flu. And I instantly went, oh, he's right. And I felt better because it was the brainwashing that we were subjected to.
Well, I've had it twice since then, and funny enough, it was the last 2 Christmases. Just as I was about to set off for the family in Bournemouth, OK, I got COVID. But I didn't feel I had COVID. I just decided to check myself because I was going to join other members of my family, some of whom are quite elderly.
Were you looking for an excuse?
Funny enough, that's what my sister said. She said, oh, when you're taking your COVID test this year, Mike, you know, because I'm going down this year as well. But But no, the point is I didn't feel any ills, and mildest symptoms lasted about 36 hours. So that proves to me that having had the jabs has helped me not suffer the worst of it. As for this story here, specifically, death of boy 14, 3 weeks after COVID jab, of significant public concerns as a coroner, so that's something we've got to look at. But I would say, on a very wide basis, without being an expert, of course, some people who have a COVID jab are sadly going to suffer for things that may or may not be related to that jab. We don't know.
And I think the tragedy of this is that, coming back to my point about it should always have been a cost-benefit analysis for the individual, is that children, this healthy 14-year-old boy, was never at a statistical risk of dying from COVID-19 infection.
Nobody at that age was, were they?
You know, I was part of the legal team, as I think you know, trying to ask for a judicial review for the government to justify, and for, who was it at the time? We've had so many changes of personnel. For the Health Secretary, it wasn't...
Sajid Javid.
Sajid Javid, thank you. At the time, to explain the justification for it, because we felt like that had never been happened. And we couldn't even get it in front of the judge, really.
Yeah.
We tried and tried at every single stage, and we were just shut down, and they just said... You mean you are questioning the chief medical officers? In a nutshell, I'm paraphrasing, but the judicial process basically said you cannot possibly question the chief medical officers. And sadly, that's why 14-year-old boys are going to end up losing their life if we don't stop them immediately for the under-18s. Let's moving on. Sam. Right, Mick Lynch. What's he telling us? I'm not the Grinch, he says, RMT union boss.
Well, he says he's not the Grinch, but I think your viewers may think otherwise. I mean, he's announced this series of strike action over Christmas. There's already a massive planned engineering works over the entire rail network over Christmas anyway. So you put these strikes on top of that, and it's just utter misery for those of us who use trains regularly.
And who want to use trains.
Exactly.
Who want to use trains, and we're just being stopped.
And it's also, it's not just the people on the trains, it's all those businesses who are going to lose out, people travelling up and down for Christmas to see their families, going out for meals, you know, catching up on drinks and what have you,
whatever.
Exactly, all those station shops, they really actually get really hit by these strikes because obviously the entire station closes. And so, I mean, we've got an editorial today talking, it's on our front page today, it's also, we've got the lead column on it, and we talk about how, you know, this really is going to wage economic warfare on businesses over Christmas. And it also has huge personal costs. All those people who, you know, have got personal reasons for needing to travel. I think it really just is, you know, it's getting beyond a joke.
Sorry to interrupt. I've just had a dinner cancelled on December the 15th. Now, the 15th isn't a strike day, but 13th and 14th and 16th and 17th are. This was 200 people in a do that's been arranged in the City of London since March of this year. And they can't take a chance. It's just now been cancelled. Loads of people coming from all over the country, the West Country, the north of England. And
that's because of the travel, they've cancelled it.
Because of the travel. If the strike's on the 2 days before, and the 15th is supposed to be a free day, but of course the trains will all be in the wrong place, how, A, are they going to get there, and B, get home?
And it feels, Tommy, doesn't it, like when you leave the house these days, whether you're going in a car or a train or a bus, there's no guarantee you're going to get to where you're going to get to. You're either going to be sat in a traffic jam. It's like the only way we can get anywhere is walking or cycling.
So I am a job in gigging stand-up. So we do gigs all over the country. On Sunday just gone, we were in Cardiff, but right up until the 11th hour, me and the 3 other comedians that were on the bill were like, look, we might all have to jump into a car together. We don't know what's happening with the trains, don't know about cancellations, don't know about problems. And now, over this period, there'll be a direct impact on work because you just... And it's sometimes it's a bit scary because you think you're leaving a gig at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
You might be stuck in a town.
And also, it really hits as well teenagers because they can't afford to just get in a taxi and call an Uber, so they're ending up sitting in their bedrooms and not going out, which is awful. They've had enough of that. Tommy, what's this story about online gambling talking about young men?
Yeah, look, firstly, full disclosure, I've been to Vegas 14 times. Okay?
That's ridiculous.
The gambling home of the planet.
What, just for fun?
Just for fun. But I don't gamble. I've probably spent like $200-300 in all that time in all the visits. So I don't have the gambling gene. But I've been surrounded by it. I've got gamblers in the family or friends and people that have been at the wrong side of it. So the story is saying that there's a huge increase in people going to the NHS for help with their addiction to gambling, meaning they're suffering, they're actually facing... They're facing the most depressing times ever, and they're suicidal young men as well. An annual rise in them going to the NHS. And I suppose the big debate is this what the NHS is for? Should the NHS be supporting these guys, and they are mainly men, with their addictions? NHS gambling clinics, but NHS used to receive millions of pounds from gambling companies to support.
And they've now turned it down.
And they've turned it down.
They don't want to take it anymore.
And
What's all that about?
Right, that's the bit I don't get. I'm like, OK, I get it, that the problem's there, and maybe they felt immoral taking the money and then still feeding the habit and then kind of work. But take the money while you work out something else. But don't stop taking the money. And now we've just got this added pressure on our health service.
There's one very important statistic in this to put it into perspective. Overall, it is estimated that around 0.5% of the UK adult population has got some form of gambling addiction. That's a very, very small percentage of the population. I'm not saying that we mustn't put all the resources in to help people who've got the problem, but I don't think we should get demonic about the gambling industry for 0.5% of the population.
Yeah. OK. Right, thank you, team. I'm going to be joined after the break by Conservative MP Miriam Cates and how children should be protected online through the Online Safety Bill. It's not, to me, as simple as it might sound. We're also expecting Nicola Sturgeon to make a statement any moment now. That's coming up after your morning news with Rosie.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The UK government has won its legal battle against a second Scottish independence referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
The Supreme Court ruling comes after Scotland's First Minister announced plans to hold another vote in October next year. Nicola Sturgeon says she's disappointed by the decision but will respect it. She also says it exposes as myth any notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership and makes the case for independence. Nicola Sturgeon's going to be speaking shortly in Edinburgh. We'll bring it to you live here. Now, some homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers, have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GBNews. They say they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are given accommodation.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The Home Secretary is blaming the growing migrant crisis on extenuating circumstances. Appearing in front of the Commons Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman said accepting Ukrainians fleeing Russia's invasion had impacted migrant processing. As promised, let's go live to Edinburgh to hear from Nicola Sturgeon.
The Scottish Parliament to legislate for a referendum on independence. First of all, while I am obviously very disappointed by it, I do respect and accept the judgment of the court. In securing Scotland's independence, we will always be guided by a commitment to democracy and respect for the rule of law. That is a principle, an important principle, but of course it also reflects a practical reality. The route we take must be lawful and democratic for independence to be achieved. And as is becoming clearer by the day, achieving independence is not now just desirable, it is essential if Scotland is to escape the disaster of Brexit, the damage of policies imposed by governments we do not vote for, and the low-growth, high-inequality economic model that is holding us back. However, we must be clear today that the Supreme Court does not make the law, it interprets and applies the law. If the devolution settlement in the Scotland Act is inconsistent with any reasonable notion of Scottish democracy, as now seems to be the case, that is the fault of Westminster lawmakers, not the justices of the Supreme Court. In addressing the implications of today's ruling, it's also important to be mindful of what the court was not asked to decide and therefore what the ruling does not tell us. The court was not asked to decide if there is a democratic mandate for a referendum. The mandate and the parliamentary majority for a referendum is quite simply undeniable. Nor was the court asked if Scotland should be independent. Only the Scottish people can be the judge of that. And it was not asked if there is any democratic means by which Scotland can choose independence. The question the court was asked to decide, indeed the only question the court could reasonably answer, was a narrower one. Would a bill providing for an advisory referendum on independence be within the current powers of the Scottish Parliament? In other words, can the Scottish Parliament legislate for an independence referendum without the prior agreement of Westminster? Now, as we know, the court has answered that question in the negative. It has determined that under the Scotland Act 1998, which of course encapsulates the current devolution settlement, even an advisory referendum asking the question, should Scotland be an independent country, is a matter reserved to the Westminster Parliament. What that means is that without an agreement between the Scottish and UK governments for either a Section 30 order or a UK Act of Parliament to change its powers, the Scottish Parliament cannot legislate for the referendum that the people of Scotland have instructed it to deliver. That is a hard pill for any supporter of independence, and surely indeed for any supporter of democracy to swallow. However, as I said back in June when I informed Parliament that the Lord Advocate had agreed to make this reference, it was always the case that in the absence of an agreement with the UK Government, the question of the Scottish Parliament's competence in relation to a referendum would end up in the Supreme Court. If not before legislation, then certainly after any decision by Parliament to pass a bill. So while it is, I think, a statement of the obvious that this is not the outcome I hoped for, it does give us clarity. And having that clarity sooner rather than later allows us now to plan a way forward, however imperfect that might be. Now, I am enough of a realist to know that the immediate questions posed by today's judgment will be for me and the SNP. That is entirely understandable. I'm also long enough in the political tooth to expect some triumphalism on the part of unionist politicians. However, unionists of a more thoughtful disposition, and yes, I do believe they exist, will, I suspect, know that to be misguided. Indeed, they will have been hoping that the court, as the UK Government asked it to do, would have declined to answer the substantive question today. That's because they will understand that this judgment raises profound and deeply uncomfortable questions about the basis and the future of the United Kingdom. Until now, it has been understood and accepted by opponents of independence as well as by its supporters that the UK is a voluntary partnership of nations. The Royal Commission on Scottish Affairs back in 1950 said this: Scotland is a nation and voluntarily entered into the Union as a partner. That sentiment was echoed nearly 60 years later by the Calman Commission, which described the UK as a voluntary union and partnership. And it was reinforced in 2014 by the Smith Commission, which made clear that nothing in its report prevented Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose. What today's ruling tells us, however, is that the Scotland Act does not, in fact, uphold that long-held understanding of the basis of the relationships that constitute the UK. On the contrary, it shatters that understanding completely. Let's be absolutely blunt. A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality. And that exposes a situation that is quite simply unsustainable. I don't often, as all of you know, quote former Tory Prime Ministers, but I will make an exception today. In the words of former Tory Prime Minister John Major, no nation can be held irrevocably in a union against its will. Indeed, perhaps what today's judgment confirms more than anything else is that the only guarantee for Scotland of equality within the British family of nations is through independence. That fact is now clearer than ever before. The immediate question, of course, is what happens now? Obviously, I'm making these remarks just a couple of hours after the court issued its judgment. While the terms and import of the ruling are clear, it will still be important to absorb and consider the full written judgment properly. I think it's safe to predict that this will not be my last word on the matter. However, my initial views, building on what I said in June, are as follows. First of all, it is worth repeating that the court judgment relates to one possible route to Scotland making a choice on independence, a referendum bill in the Scottish Parliament without Westminster agreement. While it is absolutely the case, if the UK was a voluntary partnership, that this would not be needed, it does remain open to the UK government, however belatedly, to accept democracy and reach agreement. I make clear again today, therefore, that I stand ready at any time to reach agreement with the Prime Minister on an adjustment to the devolution settlement that enables a lawful democratic referendum to take place, a process that respects the right of people in Scotland to choose our future, in line with the clear mandate of the Scottish Parliament, lets politicians make the case for and against independence, and crucially allows the Scottish people to decide. What I will not do, however, is go cap in hand. My expectation, in the short term at least, is that the UK government will maintain its position of outright democracy denial. That position is, in my view, not just unsustainable, it is also utterly self-defeating. The more contempt the Westminster establishment shows for Scottish democracy, the more certain it is that Scotland will vote yes when the choice does come to be made. As for that choice, and for the avoidance of any doubt, I believe today, just as I did yesterday, that a referendum is the best way to determine the issue of independence. The fact is, the SNP is not abandoning the referendum route. Westminster is blocking it. And in that scenario, unless we give up on democracy, and again, for the avoidance of any doubt, I, for one, am simply not prepared to do that, we must and we will find another democratic, lawful and constitutional means by which the Scottish people can express their will. In my view, that can only be an election. The next national election scheduled for Scotland is, of course, the UK general election, making that both the first and the most obvious opportunity to seek what I described back in June as a de facto referendum. As with any proposition in any party manifesto in any election, it is of course up to the people how they respond. No party can dictate the basis on which people cast their votes, but a party can be, indeed should be, crystal clear about the purpose for which it is seeking popular support. In this case, for the SNP, that will be to establish, just as in a referendum, majority support in Scotland for independence, so that we can then achieve independence. That then is the principle. However, now that the Supreme Court's ruling is known and a de facto referendum is no longer hypothetical, it is necessary to agree the precise detail of the proposition we intend to put before the country. For example, the form our manifesto will take, the question we will pose, how we will seek to build support above and beyond the SNP, and what steps we will take to achieve independence if we win. Now, as you would expect, I have views on all of that. However, given the magnitude of these decisions for the SNP, the process of reaching them is one that the party as a whole must be fully and actively involved in. I can therefore confirm that I will be asking our National Executive Committee to convene a special party conference in the new year to discuss and agree the detail of a proposed de facto referendum. In the meantime, the SNP will launch and mobilise a major campaign in defence of Scottish democracy. For we should be in no doubt, as of today, democracy is what is at stake. This is no longer just about whether or not Scotland becomes independent, vital though that decision is. It is now more fundamental. It is now about whether or not we even have the basic democratic right to choose our own future. Indeed, from today, the independence movement is as much about democracy as it is about independence. Now, to conclude, before I take questions, of course, I am well aware that there will be a real sense of frustration and disappointment today in both the SNP and the wider movement. I share that. My message, though, is this. While that is understandable, it must be short-lived, and I believe it will be. Indeed, I suspect we will start to see just how short-lived in the strength of the gatherings planned for later today in Edinburgh and other parts of Scotland. The fact is, we have work to do. The case for Scotland becoming independent is more compelling and urgent than ever. Independence is now essential because of what Westminster control means on a day-to-day basis for people in this country now and for future generations. Thanks to Westminster control, the UK economy is in crisis and we're entering a new age of Tory austerity. Low-income households in the UK are now 20% poorer than their counterparts in France, 21% poorer than in Germany. Let me put that into context. That means the living standards of the lowest income households in the UK, including Scotland, are £3,800 lower than their French equivalents. Thanks to Westminster control, we're subject to an immigration and asylum system that neither works in practice nor serves our need to grow our population. It mistreats those who come to our shores looking for sanctuary from oppression and deprives us of the talents and the taxes of those who want to live, work and contribute to our country. Thanks to Westminster control, even the limited measure of self-government that devolution provides is no longer guaranteed. The steady erosion of the powers of our Parliament, the undermining of the Seoul Convention, the imposition of the UK Internal Market Act and now the retained EU Law Bill. And if we stick with Westminster control, we are stuck outside the European Union permanently. And that comes at a heavy cost. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, Brexit will mean in the long run a fall in national income of 4% compared with EU membership. That's equivalent to a cut in public revenues in Scotland of £3.2 billion. All the main Westminster parties now support a Brexit that Scotland did not vote for. And the Brexit conspiracy of silence that exists between them means the UK economy will become weaker and people will pay a heavier and heavier price. That price will be paid in hard economic terms, but also in the narrowing of horizons and loss of opportunities for generations to come. Scotland can do better than this. The example of independent countries across Europe and the world, many with nowhere near the assets and strengths we have, tells us that loudly and clearly. We hear from Westminster that what is needed is stability. But let's be clear, the Westminster system has shown that it is not capable of securing stability. The people relying on food banks are not being offered stability. Those across our country afraid to switch on their heating are not being offered stability. The businesses struggling with Brexit are not being given stability. The young people denied the rights and opportunities of EU membership are not being offered stability. A UK model that delivers low growth and low productivity, coupled with sky-high rates of poverty and inequality, does not and never will offer stability. Scotland can do so much better. So yes, of course, this judgment is a disappointment, but it is not one we can or will wallow in. Indeed, getting the judgment now rather than later gives us the clarity we need to plot a definite way forward. Fundamentally, our job in the independence movement today is the same as it was yesterday. It is to persuade a majority of the Scottish people of the fact that independence is the best future for Scotland and ensure a democratic process that allows majority support to be established beyond doubt. That job is not easy, I know. On some days, like today perhaps, it feels more difficult than ever. But nothing, absolutely nothing worth doing is ever easy. There is no doubt whatsoever in my mind that independence will be worth it. And my resolve to achieve independence is as strong as it has ever been. Indeed, it is, if anything, today even stronger. Prosperity, equality, internationalism, and now, without any doubt, the very democracy of our nation depends on independence. Thank you all very much indeed, and I will now move to, no doubt, many questions. I will take, firstly, Glenn Campbell.
First Minister, can you spell out what election outcome you would consider a mandate for independence? And if you don't get it, is that the end of the independence campaign?
Can I, first of all, say I am one individual. I happen to be leader of the SNP and the First Minister, but I do not alone decide questions like, is the independence campaign over? That is dependent on the views of people across Scotland. Only the people of Scotland can decide if and when Scotland becomes independent. In terms of election mandates, as I've said, we will set out, as we would be are duty bound to do before any election, the precise nature of what we are seeking the people of Scotland to vote for and what we will then do with that mandate should we win. I want the party as a whole to be involved in that, which is why I have said we will have a special conference early in the early part of next year. In terms of the detail of your question, what I have always said, and it is a statement of fact, it should not be controversial. Scotland cannot become independent unless a majority of people in Scotland vote for that. Ideally, that is in a referendum, but if that is not in a referendum, it will be in another democratic form. But majority support for independence is an essential requirement of Scotland or any country becoming independent. Colin Mackay.
Just following on from that, does that mean that you would count the votes of supporters of the Green Party, ALBA, at a general election as supports for independence as well as the SNP then?
Well, as I said, we will set out the detail of exactly what we will put before people. It is right that a few hours after, not even a few hours after the judgment, we take time to consider these questions and for the SNP to have a full democratic process of determining these matters. But votes, I can only speak for the SNP, so what we put forward in an election will be put forward by the SNP, and what we will be asking people to vote for in voting for the SNP is independence. It is the case that indeed I lead a government that has within it another party that supports independence. I'm not going to speak for them today, or indeed try to speak for them at all. That is a matter for them. I'm sure we will have discussions about it. James Cook.
First Minister, talking of those other people.
GBNews Live. This is the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and leader, of course, of SNP in Scotland, giving reaction to this decision by the Supreme Court that the referendum cannot be held or organised by the Scottish Parliament alone, that Westminster has a say in that. No independence referendum without Westminster's consent. Nicola Sturgeon saying she was disappointed but would respect that decision. However, going on to say that Scottish democracy would not be denied. The SNP was not abandoning the referendum route and indicating that the general election would become the referendum, effectively the vote on independence, with a major campaign, she said, in defence of Scottish democracy. Well, welcome to GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and also coming up this hour, of course, it is Westminster as well, because it's PMQs Live today. Rishi Sunak.
Virginia Crosby.
Set to face Keir Starmer for the fourth time with a mixed bag of performances, some may say, so far. This is the scene live in the Commons with Wales questions taking place at the moment. And this will be the first PMQs post-autumn statement. So Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer likely to perhaps push the Prime Minister over those planned tax rises and public spending cuts. Also, as we've just been hearing the day, the Supreme Court rules the Scottish Government does not have power to hold another independence referendum without the UK's government consent. Joining us here in the studio, Conservative Member for Parliament for Wellingborough and a former Deputy Leader of the House, no less, Peter Bone. Peter, how long were you Deputy Leader for? Just remind us.
It was a few weeks.
A few weeks.
I didn't actually get fired as Deputy Leader of the House of Commons. They removed the post. So
right.
I suddenly find there wasn't a post for me to...
So you were redundant in that respect?
I think I was in a way redundant.
Was it fun?
I know, yeah. I mean, I was doing a lot on Parliament engaging with government. You say the government, bringing government to Parliament again, because government has drifted away. They've become sort of a dictatorship on many occasions, and we'll be doing a lot of work on that. So, I mean, that work will continue in the Leader's office, but actually they do need a deputy leader. I mean, only recently there was a time we had to suspend Parliament because the Leader of the House wasn't there.
Yeah.
They do need a deputy.
And as we'll see, I think, shortly with PMQs, it's quite a lively chamber at the moment with everything. Your response, however, to what we've just been hearing from Nicola Sturgeon as a member of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most people thought the court would come to that decision. The referendum, everyone knew, was a once-in-a-generation referendum. And by the way, she says she's going to fight a general election on this issue. General elections are not decided on one issue. You don't vote Conservative or a Labour or SNP on one issue. So there will be no mandate from that, because you know, people might vote Conservative because we're doing something on the small boats issue. Yeah. But you can't say it's one issue. So that's just misleading.
And a reporter's question on that very point, what would you take as a mandate in terms of the votes or the number of seats returned and so on? Because, I mean, let's remind people, 55 to 45% for the referendum vote itself. Fairly close, but it was a majority. And the plan, I know, was for the second referendum for October next year. And one assumes by then, perhaps people are going to be more worried about jobs, economy, and what's in their pockets.
Yeah, I mean that's what voters in Scotland will be decided like they will be in the rest of the country. They'll be thinking, who do we want to vote? Who represents me most going forward? And it's never on one issue. So she can't claim that if the SNP are the biggest party in Scotland, that there should be a referendum. That's nonsense.
We may be hearing from Ian Blackford, of course, in this session of PMQs.
6 SNP, I think, are on the order paper. Most unusual for Prime Minister's question. And there is going to be, I think, an urgent question on this issue following. So there's going to be a lot of debate in Parliament on it.
Yeah, because, and we will be taking that, because, of course, this was a legal decision, not a political decision. It still has to be debated in the House. However, I mean, looking at the bigger picture for this PMQs, as we were saying, this is the first since the autumn statement. And I think I'm probably fair in saying some unease on the Tory backbenchers about this idea of the tax cuts and the tax rises and the spending cuts, and what that may do to you at the ballot box in 2 years' time.
Well, I think there clearly were tax rises. You could also say there was a lot of increase in expenditure as well, not a cut in expenditure, and I'm not sure...
Although that may come down the road a little bit later,
yeah, but it's also not what the Conservative Party stands for. We stand for more efficient public services, less cost, and lower taxes. I have to be careful, though, because I've been asked to chair the bill that's going to deal with these measures. So I can't perhaps say what I might like to say.
Right. However, you will obviously have been speaking to people and got an idea about what's happening in terms of those backbenchers. It is interesting that the Times is reporting that 80 of them have decided perhaps not to stand at the next general election. Only 2 have gone public so far. I think they've got till, December the 5th to actually show their hand?
I think it'll be a lot later than that. But, I mean, 80 people not standing at every election, lots of MPs don't stand. Was that a Times story?
It was.
Yeah, I think the Times trying to sell newspapers.
But the Speaker's on his feet. Let's head over to the Commons.
Is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come questions to Prime Minister Jonathan Gullis.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that members across the House will want to join me in wishing both England and Wales the best of luck in the World Cup. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in places like Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork aren't getting